guys, I'm back from my training op and I've a lot of really interesting stories to share with you. I've got enough that I'm gonna break them up into two parts, this being the first. I'd love to put them in all one entirety, but I just haven't had a chance to write them all down yet. I didn't have anything too crazy happen when I was out there, but we did have one incident with a rookie that I found relevant. Since I'm sure you guys have been waiting for these, I'll just get right into the stories. I'll assign each batch of stories to the person who told them to me. Like Katie. Katie is a vet who's been an SAR officer for about 15 years. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is widely considered one of the best in her field. She was one of the most enthusiastic storytellers, and since we were together a fair amount of time during exercises, she ended up telling me about 4 that really stuck with her. The first she told me in response to me asking about her most traumatic calls. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain, since the potential of nasty accidents is higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said. One of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They'd warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course, there's always those who don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials and he took them out into an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best Katie could figure, they'd walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid, but actually wasn't. It gave way, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids died as well, but the other 2 survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs. The other was almost unharmed, save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured kid left his sibling behind and set out to find help. Katie said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before a storm overtook him. The kid stopped to try and get warm, or maybe just to rest, and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who'd frozen to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how as she got closer, she realized first that it was a child, second, that they were deceased, and third, that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she'd ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright, with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he'd died crying. His face was twisted, and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me repeatedly that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other traumatic story she told me that stood out in my mind was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced that something bad had happened because he'd never failed to come home on time. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area, and Katie started seeing blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't sure exactly what body parts it had come from, but the farther she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and tissue trail to a sheltered area under a cliff face, and she finds the climber. She said there was so much blood, more than she'd ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him, as if he'd died crawling. She looks closer and sees that he'd been partially disemboweled, which is where the tissue she'd seen had come from. The guy had an ice pick tucked into a hip holster, and it's covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be sure exactly what happened, but she said at best she could figure it went a little something like this. The guy had been attempting to climb up to the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He'd probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he'd gotten impaled by the axe, and it had disemboweled him. He drug himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under the cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who had come to help her remove the body threw up when they turned him over, and a good portion of his intestines spilled out. I mentioned to her that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing. Her eyes lit up, and she leans in close to me. "Want to hear a real doozy?" she asks. She tells me about how, when she first started, there was a case that got a lot of attention in the media. A family had been out berry picking in the area of the forest very close to the entrance to the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanishes. There's an absolutely massive search, and they find absolutely nothing. It's another one of those cases where it's like the kid was never there in the first place. The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but is eventually called off. Fast forward to 6 months later, the family comes back to place flowers at a memorial that's been set up for their kid. They bring their other son. While they're placing the flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span, he vanishes into thin air. Now, obviously the parents are beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose 1 kid, but to lose 2 is beyond imagining. The search is huge, one of the largest in state history. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park looking for the kid, but again, there's no trace of him. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking out miles from the part of the park that he'd vanished from. And then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radios in that he has found the kid. They assume that the kid was dead, but the volunteer says that not only is he alive, he's in good shape. KD and her team go out to recover the kid, and when they get there, she can't believe that this is the kid that's been missing. His clothes are clean, there's no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't appear traumatized. The volunteer says he found the kid sitting on a log, playing with a little twig bundle that's bound together with some old rope. Katie asks him where he's been, who was with him for those 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with the Fuzzy Man. Now, Katie firmly believes it's Bigfoot, so she gets all excited and asks what he means by fuzzy. Was he hairy? But the kid says no. He wasn't hairy. He was a fuzzy man. And he describes a man that's blurry. Like when you close your eyes, but not all the way closed. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kid with him deep into the woods. The kid says he slept in a hollow tree, and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. Katie asks if the man was mean, if he scared the kid, and the kid says, "No, he wasn't scary, but I didn't like how he didn't have eyes." Katie says that they get the kid back to headquarters and a cop takes him into town to talk to him more about what happened. She's friends with the cop that talked to him, and she says that the kid described being kept in this tree by the fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around a very specific clearing, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell real loud, even though he didn't have a mouth. When the kid got scared at night, the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him the twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate more on that. The cops are just sort of left scratching their heads, and the search for his brother is renewed with no results. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never find him. The last story that Katie told me was something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was a rookie. They were learning the basics of high elevation belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly as she told it to me. So I go take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group. But I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize that I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't a, "oh, I got turned around" kind of lost. I mean, I had literally no fucking clue where I was. If you'd asked me, I don't even think I would have been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and you have no idea what to do. So I just stood there for a while, just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stood there, the more confused and turned around I got. So I started walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. As I'm walking, it's just getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow, and then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head, almost. Like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky. And it's telling me over and over, "It's okay, it's okay. You just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat, and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat. Eat, eat." So I start looking around for anything I can eat, and I swear to God, I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was bottomless, and I think I would have eaten just about anything you put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out when I hear an actual voice coming toward me. I go toward it and see one of the other SARs, and he looks fucking terrified. He's running towards me, asking me if I'm okay, what the hell I'm doing out here, and the scary thing was, as he's running towards me, I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not even really thinking about what I'm doing, but what I am thinking is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again, so I just have to eat. He sees me doing that and he backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away, that he's not going to hurt me, and that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put the knife away. I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for half an hour or so, but he tells me I've been gone for 2 fucking days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain. And if I'd kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 miles of wilderness. They'd never have found me. He can't believe I'm not dead, and of course, I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time has passed at all. I don't say anything, I just go back with him to a rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests and try to figure out what happened. As best they can guess, I was in some sort of weird state, which is like kind of amnesia or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It's never happened again. But I'll tell you, ever since then, I never go out there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me when I have to leave a group. But I tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain. The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops like this to help out, but doesn't work full-time for us anymore. He specialized in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to knowing where they'd gone. He's a legend among the more senior vets, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at a dinner one evening, and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual, but when we got on the subject of our weirder calls, I mentioned that I had had a buddy who'd gone up a set of stairs. He got kind of quiet and asked me if I'd ever heard of a little boy who'd disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me the story. They were out looking for this 11-year-old boy, Joey, who'd gone missing near a river. Of course, the first thought was that he'd fallen in and drowned, but when they brought the dogs out, they led SAR officers away from the river and up into a very densely forested area. When we do searches for people, we search in a grid pattern, and we search every box of the grid incredibly thoroughly. What EW's team noticed right away was that a very strange pattern was emerging. Dogs in alternating boxes were picking up Joey's scent, but losing it when they overlapped with another box. If you think of it as a checkerboard, Joey's scent was being picked up in random black squares, but never in red. This, of course, didn't make any sense, because how could the kid bounce from area to area without leaving a scent in each place he passed? EW and his partner pass into a new box of the grid, and EW notices a set of stairs about 50 yards away. He tells his partner that they need to go check near it, but his partner flat out refuses. He tells EW that he's made it a point to never go near any stairs he sees, and that while it may be routine, he's not to pretend that it's normal. He tells EW that he'll wait in sight while EW checks. EW says that he was irritated, but he fell for the guy and didn't push him on the subject. I walked over to the stairs. They were small, kind of like stairs into a basement. I don't really feel strongly one way or the other about them. The stairs, I mean. So I wasn't scared or anything. I guess I'm just like everyone else, and I just prefer not to think about them too much. Anyway, I went over and I could see that there was something lying on the bottom step, sort of curled up. My heart sank, because of course, you always hope for the best, but we were confident that we'd find this kid alive, because he'd only been missing for a few hours. But I knew right away that it was him, and that he was dead. He was curled up in a little ball on the step, holding his stomach. It looked like he'd been in horrible pain when he died, but I didn't see any blood, except for some on his lips and chin. I radioed in that we'd found him, and we got his body back to command. That poor family was devastated. The parents couldn't understand how he died, because he'd only been gone for such a short amount of time, and on top of that, we didn't have any obvious cause of death, which just made it worse. I figured he'd probably eaten something poisonous since he was holding his stomach when I found him, but I didn't want to guess. It's hard enough to hear that your kid is dead, let alone have some stupid SAR guy guessing about what happened. They took him away, and I went home and tried to not think about it. I hate finding dead kids, man. I love this job, but it's one of the reasons I left. I've got 2 daughters, and the thought of losing them was just... He choked up a little here. He's not great with emotional stuff like that, and it's always sort of awkward to see a grown man cry, so I didn't really know what to do. He pulled himself together eventually, though, and he kept going. We don't always hear back from the coroners about cause of death. It's not really our job to know, I guess, and sometimes if they think it's foul play, they won't tell us because of legal bullshit. But I've got a friend who works in the sheriff's department, and he'll usually pass along any interesting info if I ask. In this case, though, I actually got a call from him about a week later. He asks if I remember the kid, and of course I do, and he says something seriously weird is going on. He tells me, "EW, man, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the coroner has no idea what happened to this kid, and he's never seen anything like it." My friend goes on to tell me that when the coroner opened the kid up, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The kid's organs were like Swiss cheese. Quarter-sized holes were punched clean through about every single organ the kid had, aside from his heart and lungs. But his colon, his stomach, his kidneys, even one of his testicles were full of these clean holes. My friend said the coroner described it as if someone had taken a hole punch and punched holes out of everything. They were so neat. But the kid didn't have a scratch on him, no entry or exit wounds. The closest anyone had ever seen like it was a guy who filled himself with buckshot a year or so back while cleaning his rifle. No one had a clue what could have possibly have caused it. My friend asked me if I'd ever heard of anything like it or if we'd had similar cases in the past, but I'd never even heard of something like that, and I told him I wasn't going to be of any help to him. As far as I know, the coroner determined the cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows what really happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go into the woods alone, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I still love it out there. But that case, and a couple others, just sort of ruined it for me. Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. Before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me really close. He tells me that there's bad things out there. Things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't have a chance to talk with him again, but that story stuck with me. Then, by pure coincidence, I got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the SAR field for years. We were partnered on a grid sweep during a training exercise, and we were chatting casually about how we liked the job, what kind of things we'd seen, and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout, given the area that we were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs and that I wish I knew more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we are never, ever supposed to do, but I did it, and he did the same. About 7 years ago, he tells me he was out on a call with a rookie. They were in an area of the park that had a lot of strange reports and events. Disappearances, stories about lights in the forest, odd noises, things like that. The rookie was totally spooked, kept going on and on about things out in the woods. according to PB, the guy wouldn't stop talking about the goat man. Just go on and on about the goat man this and the goat man that. Finally, I told him that there were plenty else to be afraid of out here that was very real, and that he'd better get over this thing with the goat man. The rookie wanted to know what kind of things I was talking about, and I just told him to shut up and walk. We crested a little ridge, and there was a staircase about 10 yards ahead. The rookie stops dead in his tracks and just stands there looking at him. I tell him, "See? That's something you should be afraid of." The rookie asks me what the hell these are doing out here, and for some reason I just open up and tell him the truth. Or what I've been told is the truth. I could have gotten in a lot of trouble for doing what I did, and I could get in a lot of trouble for repeating it to you. But you're a nice kid, and I want you to stop looking into this. Quit while you're ahead. So, I'll tell you what I know, under the condition that you never breathe a word of this to the soups. I told him I wouldn't say a word, and he double-checked that our radios were off. When I first started out, we were a little less tight-lipped about them and other things that happened out here. We warned people before they were even hired that there was weird shit going on. I guess the Forest Service was tired of having such a massive turnover rate, and they wanted people to know what they were getting into. So they started having people sign these agreements that they weren't allowed to go on the media about what they were going to see. The FS didn't want to scare people away, so the last thing they needed were spooked rookies running off to the media with stories of ghosts and haunted stairs. But eventually, they found the agreements weren't necessary. People not only didn't want to talk about what they saw, it wouldn't. A few times, media tried to talk to people when kids or hikers would disappear, and no one would say a word. Can't really explain it. I guess we just don't really want to admit that anything is wrong. This is our job, to be out in the woods every single day. We don't need to be spooked, and the best way to avoid that is to pretend like everything's okay. So I'll tell you everything I can think of. And after that, I'm done talking about it for good. And I expect you not to bring it up around me. Ever. The stairs have been out here as long as the parks have existed. We have records going back decades describing them. Sometimes people go up them and nothing happens. Other times... Look, I really don't like talking about this, but sometimes really bad shit happens. I saw one guy get his hand sliced clean off when he got to the top step. He reached out to touch a tree branch, and it happened so fast. 1 second his hand was there, and the next it was gone. Completely clean wound. We didn't find his hand, and the guy almost died. Another time, a woman touched one of the stairs, and a blood vessel in her brain exploded. Literally exploded, like a water balloon. She sort of stumbled down and came over to me, and all she got out was, "I think something is wrong with me." She dropped like a sack of flour, dead before she hit the ground. I'll never forget the way the blood leaked into the inside of her eyes. Before she died, I watched it turn red. Watched it happen, and there wasn't a single thing I could do to help. We warn people not to go anywhere near them. There's always at least one idiot who does. And even if nothing happens to them, something bad always happens. Kids go missing as we're on their trail. Someone dies the next day, cut in half in a completely safe part of the park. I don't know why, but something bad always happens. I don't know exactly why they're out here, but it doesn't matter. They're here, and if we were smart, we tell our new officers exactly what they're capable of. We were both quiet for a little while. I was afraid to talk because I wasn't sure if he was done. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he spoke up again. Have you ever noticed that you can't find the same ones twice? I nodded, expecting him to continue. But he just stayed quiet, walking alongside me, and eventually he started a story about the biggest deer he'd ever seen in the park. I didn't bring up the subject again, and I didn't press him for any more stories. He dropped out of the op the next day. Apparently, he left before the sun came up. He said he was sick. None of us have heard from him since he left. I'm going to stop here for the time being. I'll try and post the next part in the coming days, but with it being the end of summer, things are pretty busy here. Thanks for your continued interest, guys. You've really awakened this curiosity in me that I didn't even know I had.